Welcome everyone to this special reading comprehension event. I should probably take care of some frequently asked questions before we dig in. Yes, it is true that I managed to get through reading comprehension on the GMAT with no mistakes. And yes, it's true that I spent just over a minute per question on average on those questions. On that particular test, I had one mistake in sentence correction, and my verbal score was 47. No, English is not my first language, but it's a very close second. And no, I wasn't born good at reading comprehension. I actually was quite terrible at it growing up, and I remember feeling really frustrated when I would get questions like, what was the author's intent? And I would think, well, I'm not a mind reader. How could I know that? But over the years, I figured out ways to do just that. Little words that I used to think didn't matter at all actually do reveal for us what the author is thinking, and that's going to be the focus of our time together today. So without further ado, let's jump into the first passage of the day.
All right. So what I'd like to do with you all here is get you to just read the first sentence, which as you can see is kind of long. And I want you to see if you can identify who's doing what in the sentence. In other words, type for me in the chat the subject and the verb of that first sentence, because that's the fundamental skill that we need for all of verbal reasoning. Right? If we can't identify the main event in a sentence, how will we be able to do that in a passage, right? So let's start with that. What is the subject and what's the verb for that first sentence?
Thank you there for letting me know. Thank you there for letting me know in the chat about the audio problem. Hopefully that's fixed now. Please let me know there in the chat. And if it is fixed, great. Let's see what you think is the subject and the verb in that first sentence. Thanks, Surajit. Well done there, Joseph. I saw that you got it right. It's the activism and vision. It's a compound subject, those two things. Activism and vision. What about them? Those things lay, very good, at the heart of social reform. And then we get some extra information there about the progressive era. And I'm going to ask you, of all of that stuff in the first sentence, what should we really be reading? We might not want to read the entire sentence. So what's the important part? I would say that we've got women's grassroots activism and vision of something. I don't really care about civic consciousness, which is a good thing because I don't know what that is. So good thing I don't care about it. But women's grassroots activism and vision lay at the heart of social reform in the United States through some era. Okay. Skip all of that stuff that I put there in parentheses because it's still going to be there if I get a question about it later, but that's not going to help me identify what drove the author to write this passage. I go into the second sentence, which starts with the word though. Okay? Though largely disenfranchised except for school elections, comma, what do you think we're going to get after the comma? Probably the subject of this sentence, which is white middle-class women reformers. So reformers is really the subject. Everything before that is just modifying that subject. So these reformers, these white middle-class women reformers, what's the verb? What did these reformers do? They won. They won. What did they win? A variety of victories. Okay? And then we have a comma again and some more detail. But I'm going to argue that this particular detail after the comma is important to read. And I wonder who can identify for me why I say that. Why is it that I think the stuff after this comma is something that's going to be important for me to read? Well done, Joseph. Because of the word notably. Why is the word notably so important? The word notably is so important because the fact that the author chose to use that word gives us a window into the author's mind. This is a choice that the author made. This is his or her opinion. In his or her opinion, this next fact that we're about to read is notable. And if you're the kind of person who takes notes in reading comprehension, well, there's literally a word there that suggests that you take a note of whatever comes next. Notably, in the improvement of working conditions, especially for women and children. So that's the notable victory that the women reformers had. Okay. So up until now, we're getting a lot of, almost like a history lesson, right? But the one word that I would say was the most important word up until now is the word notably. Why? Because that's revealing the author's opinion. That was really the only word up until now that gives us a window into the author's mind. Okay. What's the next word? Ironically, right? Ironically, comma, though, comma. So I'm going to suggest that right there, ironically, comma, though, comma, is probably the most important text in the entire screen. I can't say for sure because I haven't finished reading the text, but it's probably going to prove to be the most important. Why do you think I say that? Why am I making such a big deal of a sentence that starts with the words, ironically though? I'm seeing your responses there in the chat, and they're not wrong, but they're not. I feel like they're not strong enough, right? So people here are saying because it's a contrast to the author's view stated earlier. It's a change of opinions and it's contradictions. It's more than that, though. It's more than a change of tone. I don't think that the author using the word ironically means that the author is changing his view. What I would say instead is that this is probably the reason the author thought to write a passage. I mean, I want you to imagine a lazy person waking up in the morning, looking outside the window and seeing it's a beautiful day. What's driving this person to just sit at his typewriter, at his desk, and type this passage? There's got to be some kind of driving force. And an irony, something that the author finds to be ironic, is very likely the reason why the author decided to stay home on a beautiful day and type a passage. Because he or she discovered something ironic, some kind of irony. So I'm going to take great pains now to fully understand why the author finds this ironic. What is it exactly that the author finds ironic, and why does the author feel that way? I'm going to take great pains to do that, because if I don't do that, I should probably just guess on the questions that go with this passage and move on to the next thing, because this is the reason the author wrote the passage. The author found something to be ironic, and I need to discover what that is. So what does it say? Ironically, though, child labor legislation pitted women of different classes against one another. Why is that ironic? Why is that ironic? And by the way, this is the first time that we're seeing women of different classes, right? Up until now, we were talking about white middle-class women, right? White middle-class women reformers. Now we're talking about women of different classes. And these child labor legislation things pitted the women of different classes against one another. The fact that the author considers this to be ironic implies what? Very good, Parash. That's right. The author is surprised, or the author finds it surprising that child labor legislation would pit women against one another. Because why? Why is it surprising? Because one would think that what? What would one naturally expect of child labor legislation? They would expect that kind of legislation to what? Exactly, Abhishek. It should have brought all women on the same ground. It should have brought the women together because presumably all women, regardless of which class they're in, middle class, lower class, upper class, you would imagine that all women would care equally about child labor. And therefore you would expect the legislation to bring them together. So I understand why the author finds it ironic that this child labor legislation actually pitted women of different classes against one another. Okay? And notice how much time and energy and focus I'm giving this one sentence that starts with the word ironically. But that's the key to my success in reading comprehension. I don't give an equal amount of attention to every sentence in the passage. I pick and choose what to give attention to and what to not give attention to. So this is all about choosing the right things to pay attention to, just like we did in the very first exercise of the day when I asked you to identify the subject and the verb of the first sentence. The subject and the verb of the first sentence were the things that I wanted to give my attention to in that first sentence, and we're doing that for the whole passage. Okay? Okay. What are we thinking at this point, right before the word to? What are we thinking there? I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I'm super curious to find out why child labor legislation pitted women of different classes against one another. And I'm pretty sure the author is about to tell me why, right? Because of the use of the word ironically. In fact, I think this is the whole reason why the author wrote the passage. The author found it surprising that this legislation pitted women of different classes against one another. And the author decided, you know what, I'm going to write a passage to try to explain why this happened, why this surprising phenomenon occurred. We know the GMAT loves surprising phenomena. Half of critical reasoning is made up of surprising phenomena. I see JD's question there in the chat. When we say class, I see what you're saying. Middle class white women versus other races or other classes. The answer is it could be anything. So we just have to look at what the author is saying later on. Right? It could be that he's going to differentiate white middle class women from, say, black middle class women, or women of color in the middle class. Or maybe the author will differentiate white middle class women from white lower class women and white upper class women. We don't know. So we just have to keep reading, and we find out a little bit later, right? When we get to women of different classes, we understand that this isn't so much about race, it's more about class, socioeconomic classes. Why did the author use the word white earlier? I imagine it's because these activists, that we're talking about here, the women's grassroots activism, I imagine it's because they were predominantly white middle class women. Okay? Great. So we keep reading. And we're about to learn why it was that this legislation pitted these women of different classes against each other. To the reformers, child labor and industrial homework were equally inhumane practices. And I imagine the important word there is the word equally. They're equally inhumane practices that should be outlawed. But here comes the difference, what drove the difference of opinion between the middle class white women and the other classes. As a number of women historians have recently observed, working class mothers, so that's working class as opposed to middle class, working class mothers did not always share this view. Why? given the precarious finances of working class families and the necessity of pulling the wages, blah, 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 working class families viewed the passage and enforcement of stringent child labor statutes as a personal economic, look at that word, disaster. Wow. Wow. I guess that's something that the white middle class women failed to consider when they were pushing for that legislation, right? They didn't take into account what that legislation would cause. Apparently it caused a disaster, a personal economic disaster to some working class families. And so these working class families made strenuous efforts to circumvent child labor laws. Okay? So now I have a really good understanding of why the author found it appropriate to stay home on a beautiful sunny day and type this passage. Let's finish this off. Yet reformers rarely understood this resistance in terms of the desperate economic situation of working class families, interpreting it instead. Okay, so the reformers misinterpreted the resistance. They didn't understand that the working class families resisted it for the reason that it was a personal economic disaster. They interpreted it instead as evidence of poor parenting. Why would the reformers interpret the working class families' resistance to child labor legislation as evidence of poor parenting? Would love to get some thoughts there in the chat. Put yourself in the shoes of these white middle class women reformers. You're hearing about all these working class families that are resisting child labor legislation, and you're interpreting that as evidence of poor parenting. Why would you interpret it that way? So yeah, it's true that middle class women are economically fine, but that's not a reason to interpret this thing as poor parenting. Like, where did poor parenting come from? I'm trying to understand, as a parent, I'm trying to understand why would opposing child labor legislation be considered poor parenting? So I see there, Priya, you're saying if you're a parent and you're against child labor legislation, that implies that you want your children to go out and work. And what kind of parent would want their children to go out and work? That's poor parenting. Okay, good. So now I understand why it was interpreted that way by the middle class women. Okay. Last sentence of the passage. This is not to dispute women reformers' perception of child labor as a terribly exploitative practice. So let's pause there for a moment, because this is important. And the reason I say this is important is because this is the author saying this. This is not the author sharing somebody else's opinion. This is actually the author speaking directly to us. The author is saying, this is not to dispute women reformers' perception of child labor as a terribly exploitative practice, but their understanding of child labor and their legislative solutions for ending it failed to take account of the economic needs of the working class families, which is what we already kind of understood from the passage, right? They failed to consider the knock-on effects of the legislation that they were pushing for. And even when they saw the resistance from the working class families, they didn't understand that resistance because they couldn't put themselves in the shoes of someone for whom this is a personal economic disaster, someone who absolutely needs their children to go out and work in order to make ends meet. Okay? Now you'll notice that I read quite a lot of the text in this passage. That happens when I have a short passage. So the shorter the passage is, the greater percentage of that passage I read. And you will see, Joseph, in the next passage, that's why we have one short one, one long one, you'll see the difference there. The shorter the passage is, the less details it will have, just because it's short, okay? So before we go to the questions themselves, let's just look at what we didn't read. So what did I not read at all? Well, I didn't care to learn about what the progressive era is considered to be. In fact, I pretty much glossed over that part as well. And I more or less glanced, very quickly at that part. And that part. I didn't not read it at all, but I glossed over it very quickly. Okay, and I want to emphasize that it's not just it's not binary. It's not either you read something extremely slowly and thoughtfully or you don't read it at all. I would say that there are like probably 3 levels. There's the stuff that you read super slowly and thoughtfully. There's the stuff that you gloss over very quickly, and there's the stuff that you don't read at all, which is what we had here in the end of that first sentence. Parash, did I read the part that says, though largely disenfranchised except for school election? Oh, good call. Yeah, no, I did not read that. Or I glossed over that. Yeah. That's right. Good question. Okay, let's look at the questions themselves. So the first question is a primary purpose question, and we should be able to answer this question without going back to the passage. What was the primary purpose? You know what? Before we look at the answer choices, maybe I'll hide the answer choices here. Can you type in the chat, how would you articulate the author's primary purpose in writing the passage? Now that we've had a long chat about what drove the author to write this passage, how would you articulate it in one sentence? What was the author's primary purpose? I like what you wrote in the chat, Joseph, but I'm going to push you to try a little bit harder. But you're on the right track. You did quite well. What I want you to think about is the fact that you started with the word show. Is this passage a show and tell kind of passage? Is the author just writing this in order to show us something? I wouldn't start with the word show. I would start with a different word. Ah, good. I see your second chat there, Joseph. Exactly. Explain, right? Explain the ironic situation, not just show that it existed. Bingo. I love that. JD wrote, describe that sometimes legislation bounces against the very people who you are supposed to be helping. That's good, JD, but it's a bit bigger picture than what we actually saw, right? You're suggesting there, JD, that the author only used this story to make a bigger point about how, in general, legislation sometimes backfires. But I didn't see that in the passage. The passage seemed to be more specifically interested in this particular case, as opposed to just using this case to make some broader point. Does that make sense? Parash, to elaborate on failure to take into account of economic needs for working class families. The only issue I have, Parash, with what you wrote is the word elaborate. Kind of same issue I had with Joseph's first chat message there where he said show. Show, elaborate, that's not strong enough. It's more than that. It's explain. Okay, Taha says that the last sentence is the primary purpose. Let's read the last sentence. This is not to dispute women reformers' perception of child labor as a terribly exploitative practice, but their understanding of child labor and their legislative solutions for ending it failed to take account of the economic needs of working class families. And I'm guessing, Taha, that you are referring more so to the stuff after the word but. Is that true? What do others think? If I just highlight that last little bit after the word but, does that capture quite well the author's primary purpose? Yeah. Good. Okay, let's look at the answer choices here. Was the primary purpose to explain why women reformers of the progressive era failed to achieve their goals? Is that the primary purpose? Is it even true that they failed to achieve their goals? I mean, I like that it starts with the word explain, answer choice A, but to Parash's point, they won a variety of victories. So how can you say that they failed to achieve their goals if they won a variety of victories? That doesn't make sense. I would also say that we never saw anywhere in the passage that the reformers failed to achieve their goals. In fact, this legislation seems to have passed, right? And it caused a disaster, a personal economic disaster. So, no reason to pick A. B, I don't like the word discuss. So I'm already not a fan of answer choice B just based on the first word. So B suggests that the whole reason the author wrote this passage was to discuss the origins of child labor laws. I'm not even going to keep reading. I'm not going to keep reading after the word laws, because there's nothing that the author could, there's nothing that the test creators could do to this answer choice to suddenly make it right. It's already wrong. Now, the reason I don't read the end of this answer choice is not because I want to save time, although that's a nice benefit. But the reason I don't want to read the rest of the answer choice is because there's guaranteed to be something attractive in there. Why do I say this? Because every wrong answer choice gets picked by a lot of people. If it doesn't get picked by a lot of people, then it never makes it past the experimental phase, right? Each question with all of its associated answer choices go through a lot of experimentation on unsuspecting GMAT test takers. And if there's an answer choice that nobody ever picks, then they replace it with a different wrong answer choice that somebody will pick. So there's definitely going to be something attractive about each and every wrong answer choice. So if I'm already confident it's wrong, why would I keep reading it only to expose myself to some attractive distraction that's still wrong? So we've eliminated A and B. C, compare the living conditions of working class. What do you think about the word compare? Was this passage written in order to compare something to something else? Is it to compare the living conditions of working class and middle class? I mean, at most, I would read up to here before I eliminate. At most. That wasn't the purpose of the passage. Okay. D. Discuss. I don't like that it starts with the word discuss. I don't like it. Discuss an oversight. Ooh, I like the word oversight, right? Failing to consider something, right? Failed to take into account. I like that. So I didn't like that it started with the word discuss, but I very much like the thing that came after it. Was the author's purpose to discuss an oversight on the part of women reformers of the progressive era? Now, a lot of people will say, I don't like this answer choice because it doesn't mention child labor legislation. Or I don't like this answer choice because it doesn't mention the different classes of women. Right? It only mentions the women reformers. Or they'll say, I don't like this answer choice because it starts with the word discuss. So there are a lot of reasons to not like it. But you have to remember that every correct answer choice will have things about it that people will be able to point at and say, that's why I don't like it. If it didn't have anything like that, everybody would pick it. So there are two things going on here, right? The wrong answer choices are always going to have something about them that people will be attracted to, and the correct answer will always have something that people will find unattractive. So we have to be careful about when we eliminate and what we eliminate. Do we have a solid reason to eliminate answer choice D? That's right, JD and Joseph, I don't like the word discuss, but if everything after the word discuss is perfect, then maybe they chose the word discuss just as a way to get people to eliminate the correct answer choice. So I'm not eliminating D just based on the word discuss, but I don't like it. I don't like that it started with the word discuss. Okay? But the word discuss is vague enough that this could be right depending on what comes after the word discuss. Whereas A and B and C, right, I didn't eliminate B because of the word discuss. I eliminated B because it said discuss the origins of child labor laws. I'm like, no, that wasn't the purpose. Okay? So I disliked it because of the word discuss, but I eliminated it because of the 5 words after the word discuss. In D, I really like what comes after the word discuss. Discuss an oversight on the part of women reformers of the progressive era. There's no reason that I can think of to eliminate this answer choice, because it is true that that's what we thought the purpose of the passage was, particularly the word oversight. Now, if I'm not ready to marry this answer choice, if I want to keep dating and see what else is out there, then I can read E. And E suggests that the purpose was to revise a traditional view. Is that true? Like, do you think I should keep reading after the word view? Was the author's purpose to revise a traditional view? Is that true? Very good, exactly, Sritam. No view is stated. Well, I guess that's not entirely true. There is a stated view here, right? This view. But that wasn't the purpose of the passage. To revise a traditional view, that's not why the author wrote this. And I want to really connect for all of you the word oversight with the words failed to take account of. Maybe also rarely understood and interpreting it instead. Any questions? That's a good observation there, Kazim, about why people would pick E. Yeah, and it's like I said, every wrong answer choice will have something attractive about it. Okay, let's look at the second question for this passage. So now we're talking about that particular view. Before we go to the answer choices, we should prepare for the answer choices, right? So they're asking, this view refers to which of the following? So let's hide the answer choices and remind ourselves what this view was referring to, right? So this came where? As a number of women historians have recently observed, working class mothers did not always share this view. Can anybody articulate for me in chat what was this view that the working class mothers did not always share? Yes, exactly. It's let me see if I can highlight it here. There. That's the view that we're talking about. Okay, let's find the correct answer choice now. Is it that some working class mothers' resistance to the enforcement of child labor laws? No. Is it? And by the way, this is the reformers' view, right? So that probably means the correct answer is either B or C, because they start with the word reformers apostrophe. Is it reformers' belief that child labor and industrial homework should be abolished? Oh, that could be right? Because they're saying these are equally inhumane practices. That's the view that that the working class mothers don't always share. Or is it the reformers' opinions about how working class families raise their children? No, definitely not that. So for me personally, I would pick B and move on at this point. I would not continue to read the remaining answer choices because I like B so much that if I do end up reading an answer choice that I like equally, well, then I'll just have to guess. And then I'll just feel bad and guess and move on. I'd rather not put myself in that position. I'd rather just pick B and move on to the next question. In other words, I don't see anything positive that can come from continuing to read the remaining answer choices. Especially given that we know that the wrong answer choices will have something attractive about them. So why expose myself to them if it's not necessary? All right. Question 3. The author of the passage mentions the observations of women historians in order to. Okay. This is a harder question than it seems because it's not asking us what was the thing that the women historians observed. It's not asking that. It's not asking just literally what did they observe. It's asking why did the author find it appropriate to tell us what they observed. In other words, how did this help the author make his point? In what way did the historian's observations promote the author's agenda? That's the question. That's what the question is asking. So it's a tougher question than it seems. We need to get into the author's head and wonder, of all the different things he could have written here in the passage, why did he decide to insert the observations of these women historians? So what do people think? Why did the author bring that in? Tanushri got it and said it better than I could have said it myself. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Tanushri. That's exactly right. The author brought in these observations in order to make his point about the irony. Right? He's saying, ironically though, child labor legislation pitted women of different classes against one another. How do we know? Why should we believe the author that that's true? Well, look at what these women historians have recently observed. But that's there in order to provide evidence for the author's assertion here about this irony. Which means, as I'm reading the first answer choice there, it means that that's the correct answer. And again, for me personally, I would not read B, C, D, E. Okay. Number 4. The passage suggests that which of the following was a reason for the difference of opinion between working class mothers and women reformers on the issue of child labor. So we are looking for the reason, right? Why did they have this difference of opinion? So again, I'll have you type in the chat, how would you articulate? I mean, we know this, right? We read very carefully and very thoughtfully most of the text in this passage. What was the reason that they had a difference of opinion? I seem to remember something about a disaster, right? For some people it was a disaster, and for some people it was not a disaster. What kind of disaster was it? What was the reason for the difference of opinion? Yeah, it had to do with economic needs. That's right, Parash. So was the difference of opinion because of the reformers' belief that industrial homework was preferable to child labor outside the home? I don't think we read anything about comparing those two. All right, industrial homework versus child labor outside the home. I don't remember reading that one was better than the other. Reformers' belief that child labor laws should pertain to working conditions but not to pay. There was no distinction between working conditions and pay. Working class mothers' resentment at reformers' attempts to interfere with their parenting? No. Working class mothers' belief that child labor was an inhumane practice? No, everybody believed that. It's this. The working class families needed every employable member of the families to earn money. That was the reason for the difference of opinion. Okay. The author of the passage asserts which of the following about women reformers who tried to abolish child labor? The women reformers who tried to abolish child labor. What do we know about those women? Before I go to the answer choices, I'll maybe remind myself that we know that they're white middle class. But this is about what the author asserts about them. Did the author say that they alienated working class mothers by attempting to enlist them in agitating for progressive causes? You know, I'll have to admit that up to here, I thought, oh, maybe, right? Maybe that's true. Maybe this is the correct answer. But then I kept reading and I was like, no, that none of that is true. So A is gone. B, they underestimated the prevalence of child labor. It's not that they underestimated the prevalence of child labor among the working classes. They underestimated the necessity for child labor among the working classes. So B is a very attractive wrong answer. Right? If we just change one word in B, instead of prevalence we say necessity, B would be right. But prevalence just means that there's a lot of it, and maybe there was a lot of it, and maybe they did underestimate how much of it there was, but none of that is in the passage. The author makes no such assertion. C, they were correct in their conviction that child labor was deplorable, but short-sighted about the impact of child labor legislation on working class families. Ooh, I like short-sighted. I like that. That again goes with the failed to take account of. Yeah, exactly, Sritam. So again, if it was me on the test, I pick C and move on. C does exactly what I needed it to do. And why am I not reading D and E? Because nothing good could come of reading them. I already know they'll be attractive for some reason or another. But I really like C, so I'll pick it and move on. And maybe now you're realizing why I was able to spend just slightly over a minute per question on average, right? Because I'm not reading all of the answer choices. According to the passage, one of the most striking achievements of white middle-class women reformers during the progressive era was... So let's hide that. Does anybody remember something in the passage that would indicate one of the most striking achievements? I seem to recall there was one particular word early on in the passage that we made a big deal out of. Anybody remember what that word was? Think about 45 minutes ago when we were talking about the women reformers won a variety of victories. Well done, Abhishek. That's the word that I'm thinking. Notably. that maps perfectly with what this question is asking about, right? One of the most striking, striking, notably, see that? One of the most striking achievements of white middle class women reformers. I know where they were talking about white middle class women reformers there. What did they do? They won a variety of victories, notably, right, or strikingly, what was it? The improvement of working conditions, especially for women and children. So which answer choice says that? There it is. It just jumped out at me. Improving women's and children's working conditions. Perfect match. Okay, so I'll do a brief pause here just to see if there are any questions, and then I'll move on to the long passage, where the strategy will be quite different. Yeah, that's a good observation there, Joseph. Did you notice that I spend a ton of time, relatively speaking, a ton of time in the passage itself, and almost no time at all in the questions and answer choices? You notice that? Priya, my best guess for difficulty level here, I mean, it varies from question to question. And that's why in the actual GMAT, you won't get 6 questions with a passage. They'll just give you the questions that have the appropriate difficulty level based on how you're doing. But I would say that the last question is probably the easiest of the 6, is my guess. And I would say that some of those harder questions in the middle are probably around 700 plus. Yeah, exactly, Joseph. So I spend as little time as possible in the answer choices, and that's also true for critical reasoning. Yeah, exactly, Kazim. Time spent on the passage is recovered in the answer choices. Correct, JD. In longer passages, I don't spend most of my time on the passage. Exactly. So let's see what that looks like. Here's our long passage for the day. What I'd like you to do here is just read the first paragraph for now, and let me know in the chat which items or which words or which phrases would you pick out from that first paragraph as kind of the main things to take out of that first paragraph. I'll refer everyone to the chat to read what Taha wrote. Taha did, I think, an excellent job. Taha called out the words exclusively, because, yet, and question. And when you say question, I think you mean the word why and the question mark at the end. In fact, I would probably say that the question mark at the end together with the word why is probably the most important thing on the screen. I haven't finished reading the passage yet, so I don't know for sure, but remember how we had the word ironically in the previous passage? And we were like, okay, the word ironically is probably the reason the author woke up in the morning and decided to write this passage, right? Because he wanted to describe this irony to people, and that's the primary purpose. Similarly here, the author is ending the first paragraph with a question. What do you think the author will do in the second and third paragraphs? My guess is the author is going to attempt to answer that question, which means that why did the author read this passage? Why did the author write this passage? Likely in order to answer that question. So that's where I'm going to invest most of my time in understanding that question. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the very beginning and see what I would read, what I would not read, and how I make those choices. Right? Why do I decide to read some stuff and not read other stuff? So here we go. In the Sonoran Desert of northwestern Mexico and southern Arizona. Okay, so I'm actually glad that we had those modifiers because I don't know the Sonoran Desert. Geography is not my strong suit, especially geography of North America. In the Sonoran Desert, which is in those places, and here comes the subject of the sentence. The flowers of several species of something, some kind of cactus, skip. And here comes the verb, were once exclusively pollinated at night by some kind of bats. I don't care about the type of bats, some type of bats. I'm not a zoologist. I don't know about different types of bats. Did you know there were different kinds of bats? I had no idea. I mean, I know there's bats and there's Batman, but that's about the extent of my knowledge about bats. But these types of flowers were once exclusively pollinated at night by these bats, which makes sense because I actually do know that bats operate at night. That's something that I did know. Okay, so what does the word exclusively mean? It means that they're not pollinated any other time other than at nighttime, or by any other animal other than bats, okay? But there are two words immediately before the word exclusively that are equally important. Were once. Why am I saying that these two words are so important? Were once exclusively pollinated. What's the implication? Yeah, Taha, used to be. So this is no longer the case. And if you're a curious person, you're probably wondering at this point, what happened? Why did this change? Why is it no longer the case? Something changed, exactly. And that's why those two words are so important. They were once exclusively pollinated at night by bats, comma, as their close relatives. Whose close relatives? Oh, these flowers. As their close relatives in arid tropical regions of southern Mexico. So when I get to southern Mexico, I glance back and because I remember seeing something about Mexico, but that was northwestern Mexico. Now, one of you wrote in the chat, do we need to create a passage map for a longer passage? For me personally, I usually don't put pen to paper, but I'm not against it as long as you're not taking notes of details. Okay, so what do I mean by details? Well, what I've seen a lot with students is they'll, in their notes, I'll see words like cardan, saguaro, and what does it say there? Organ pipe, right? The stuff that I didn't even read. If that's what your notes look like, then no, don't take notes. But if your notes look something like this, right? I'm going to draw a map here. Here's northwestern Mexico and here's southern Mexico. northwestern Mexico versus southern Mexico, and we know that this here is where the flowers used to be exclusively pollinated and no longer, whereas the close relatives in this region still are. Right? And then you say, okay, so we have two different regions there. So if you drew a map for northwestern Mexico versus southern Mexico to kind of help you digest the fact that the flowers in one region have adapted, right, have changed in some way, and in the other region they haven't, if that helps you digest it, then absolutely, that's a great note to take. Or you can do it in your head if that works better for you. Okay, so I'm not against taking notes, but it depends on the kind of notes. This is a good note to take. What's not a good note to take is where you're just copying details from the passage, details that you shouldn't have even read in the first place. So when you're writing them down in your notes, that's a double sin, right? You shouldn't have read them. You did read them, and now you're also copying them into your scratch paper. So definitely don't do that. Okay. So we have a discrepancy. We have a surprising phenomenon again. We have another surprising phenomenon. What's a surprising phenomenon? We have very similar flowers in two regions that are close to one another. You've got southern Mexico versus northwest Mexico. Yet in one of those regions, the flowers changed. The flowers adapted, and in the other they didn't. Right? In southern Mexico, they remain exclusively pollinated by bats at night, but in northwest Mexico, something's changed. That's no longer the case. Okay, keep reading. By the way, notice how much thought I put into the first sentence of this very long passage. But that's okay, because I'm probably not going to spend that much time on the rest of it. In these tropical regions, that's the regions where it didn't change, diurnal, I don't know the word diurnal, but luckily they tell me what that means. It means daytime. Daytime visitors to these flowers are ineffective pollinators. Oh, I think that explains why they're exclusively pollinated at night up to this day, right? In the tropical regions, sorry about that, in the tropical regions up to this day, they are exclusively pollinated at night by bats. Here's the reason why. It's because diurnal visitors are ineffective pollinators. Now, why are they ineffective pollinators? Some reason. I'm not going to read the reason. See, Joseph, I'm skipping the reason. If I get a question later about why those pollinators are ineffective, then I'll go read the reason. So I know that the author provided the reason, but I'm not going to read it because reading the reason for why these pollinators are ineffective is not going to help me get the big picture. In fact, it's going to make it harder for me to get the big picture because I'll be distracted by the details. Okay? So I skipped that reason. Yet, the flowers of the Sonoran Desert, that's the flowers that have adapted, so they have evolved. So I was expecting to see something like that. They have evolved to remain open after sunrise, allowing pollination by diurnal visitors, bees, birds, whatever, right? Why have these cacti expanded their range of pollinators by remaining open and receptive in daylight? That's exactly the question that I was asking myself, so I'm glad the author is asking it. Okay, now chances are that from here on out, I won't read anything. I'll probably just go to the questions at this point. Why? Because I'm quite confident that I know the purpose of the second and third paragraphs. And if I know their purpose, if I know why the author included them, then I don't need to read them. Why do I think these paragraphs exist? In order to dig into the science, the evolutionary science of why the flowers of one region adapted when the others didn't. Okay? Now, I will just glance at the beginnings and endings of each of these paragraphs just to confirm that, yep, these paragraphs' purpose is what I thought it would be. So what does it say? This development at the northernmost range of cacti may be due to a yearly variation in the abundance and hence reliability of bats. Okay, so I skipped a little bit there. but I read most of that first sentence. Yep, this is doing what I thought it would do. Okay. You might also want to read this. Pollinators can be unreliable for several reasons, and then it's going to give us 3 reasons, right? They can be, or they can be, finally they may be. So I'm reading the first 3 or 4 words of each sentence. It's not wrong to skip it entirely. I probably would have, but I don't think it's wrong to just look at the first few words just to kind of say, okay, we're being given 3 possible explanations for why these bats, why these pollinators may be unreliable. But we're not reading what those reasons are, just like we didn't read the reason in the middle of that first paragraph. Okay. Third paragraph, recent data reveals. Okay, so in the second paragraph, the author presented 3 possible reasons for why pollinators would be unreliable. And in the third paragraph, the author shares recent data, which reveals that what? I don't think I want to read what. Recent data reveals something. Blah, 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 blah. Thus, not reading it. However, thus, I'm not actually reading anything here. And then in the very end, it says, accordingly, despite their low population density, I have no idea what they're talking about here because I skipped all of the stuff before it, so I'll skip this as well. And that's an important point, right? When people skip a bunch of text and then they try to read the following sentence and they don't understand anything because of all the text that they skipped, for a lot of people, the reaction is panic. Oh no, now I don't understand this sentence. Maybe I shouldn't have skipped all that stuff before it. Let me go back and read it. But I think the appropriate response is not panic. It's, oh, okay, I should keep skipping. Right? I skipped this other stuff. I'm confident that I should have skipped it. Now I don't understand this next sentence. Well, that just means I should skip that one too. Okay, so that's my reaction when that happens to me. So I'm reading very little, right, Joseph? You can see it's very different. It's a very different approach from what I had for the short passage, right? The short passage was just 1 paragraph, and it was a lot shorter, and I read almost all of it very carefully. But the questions were very quick because I did a good job in the passage. Here in a long passage, I spent a fair chunk of time on the first paragraph, but that allowed me to spend almost no time at all in the second and third paragraphs. I just wanted to kind of confirm for myself that, yep, these paragraphs are doing what I thought they would be doing. Yeah, but I didn't exactly. I figured out the purpose of the passage in the end of the first paragraph and then made an educated guess of what the second and third paragraphs will attempt to do. Priya, good question. You're right. I don't know the conclusion of this passage because I skipped the last paragraph. But I'm okay with that because I know the purpose of the passage. So the conclusion of a passage like this is just going to present the most recent theory or the current, the best explanation that evolutionary biologists can give at the moment for why the surprising phenomenon happened. But I don't actually care to know what the reason was unless I get asked about it, and then I'll go study that reason. What I care to know about is the purpose of the passage. And the purpose of the passage is to investigate the explanation for the surprising phenomenon that these flowers did evolve while these didn't. That's the purpose of the passage, to explain or to research an explanation, right? To seek out an explanation for a surprising phenomenon. That's the purpose of the passage. What that explanation precisely is, maybe they won't ask. If they do ask, then I'll go study it. Does that make sense, Priya? And Parash, to your point there, if I get some questions about the second and third paragraph, then I'll go study the specific details that I need to in order to answer those questions. Because it's like an open book test, right? The passage is still going to be there. So I can just go and search for whatever they're asking about, study it, and use it to answer the question. But I don't want to read all the details ahead of time for a number of reasons. One, it's going to distract me from the main purpose of the passage. Two, I'm going to find myself a lot more attracted to the trap answers, because the trap answers will have some detail from somewhere in the passage, and if I've read all the details, well, now I'm identifying details from the passage and the wrong answers, and that's making them more attractive to me. Whereas if I skipped all the details and that detail comes up in a wrong answer choice, I wouldn't find anything attractive about it because I didn't read that detail. And I'll only go read the details that I need to, depending on which question I get later on. That's right, Abhishek. Okay. So let's look at the questions. This one only came with 3 questions, unfortunately. And the first one is the primary purpose of the passage. Let me hide the answer choices again and have you all attempt to articulate it yourselves. And by the way, this is what I recommend when you're studying at home, right? Is try to articulate on your own what you think was the author's primary purpose in writing the passage. Okay, let's see here. So JD says, give a hypothetical answer to the question without knowing what that answer is. Okay. Taha, main purpose to answer the question. Abhishek, what caused evolutionary changes? Priya, explain a phenomena. Ask why did it occur. Give reasons. Ooh, I like that. Yeah. So describing some surprising phenomenon, asking the question of what could have caused this surprising phenomenon, and then digging into possible explanations for that surprising phenomenon. Love that. Joseph, posit reasons for the surprising development, i.e. that these flowers are open during the day. Yeah. Atul, to give reason or answer surprising fact behind preference of pollinators. Okay, I like all of those. Those are all good. Let's have a look at the answer choices. If you see an answer choice you like, go ahead and type the letter in the chat. This is also a good time to remind you, if you're finding this session useful, to please hit the thumbs up button if you haven't already, because that really helps the channel. I want to share with you at what point I would eliminate each of the wrong answers. So in answer choice A, I read up to here and I'm thinking, if that's it, if it's just to compare the responses, that's not the right answer. But what if later on it says, so compare the adaptive responses and seek an explanation for the differences. So I just scan to see, is there a and then another verb? No, there isn't. Eliminate A. B, discuss some of the possible causes. Up to here, I like it. Again, I didn't love starting with the word discuss, but I like discuss some of the possible causes of the relatively low abundance of migratory bats. No. What the author's primary purpose was to do is to discuss some of the possible causes for why different flowers evolve differently, not for why there's a low abundance of something. C, provide a possible explanation for a particular evolutionary change in certain species of cacti in the Sonoran Desert. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. I might even pick it and move on. Now, I saw in the chat that some people were between C and E, so I'll look at E as well. First, the present recent findings. Present recent findings. How do I feel about that? Was that the primary purpose, to present recent findings? No. Did the author present recent findings? Yeah, the beginning of the third paragraph said recent data suggests or something like that. So he does do that, but that's not the primary purpose. Compare the effectiveness of nocturnal and diurnal pollination for several different species. Okay, so I see why some of you are attracted to answer choice E, but I want to challenge you to see if you can type up a reason for eliminating E. So those very same people who liked E, can you explain why it should be eliminated? Push yourself to try to do that. Wow, I love what I'm seeing in the chat. So I'm just going to read this out loud. So Taha is saying no comparison was made between these things, right? And JD is saying, actually, I think it was made. Isn't that the reason for the answer to the question? Aha. So this is a classic example of why reading details is dangerous, is actually liable to hurt you. Because JD, I think you're either completely right or mostly right. Yeah, I think if you read into all of the details in the second or third paragraph, you will see some comparison of the effectiveness of different pollinators. I'm pretty sure you will see that somewhere. But the question is about the primary purpose of the passage. And by reading details, you're going to find yourself more attracted to trap answers that call out details from the passage. A detail from the passage is never the primary purpose of the passage. So when you're comparing C to E, and you're reminding yourself that what you're interested in is the primary purpose, the reason why the author stayed home on a beautiful sunny day and sat at his typewriter at his desk and typed this passage out, it probably took him the whole day because it's a long passage. The reason that the author chose to do that was not for E. Did the author include that comparison somewhere in the passage? I don't know, maybe. I didn't read the details. Maybe it is in there. But that wasn't the reason that the author wrote the passage. The reason the author wrote the passage is answer choice C. And I think this really illustrates the point of why you literally, like, even if you had no timer, like even if you had 10 hours to solve one reading comprehension passage, you're still better off not reading the details. Because reading the details will make the trap answers more attractive. Okay, does that help? Yeah, exactly, Taha, what you said there in the end. Okay. Question 2. According to the passage, which of the following types of nectar-feeding pollinators is likely to be an unreliable pollinator of a particular cactus flower? Okay. Now we have to go back to the passage and learn everything there is to learn about what it is that makes a pollinator unreliable. Okay, so let's go back to the passage and read everything there is to know about what makes a pollinator an unreliable pollinator. And I think we were given 3 reasons for what could make a pollinator unreliable. So let's study what those 3 reasons are. So number one, they can be dietary generalists. So what does that mean? Their fidelity to a particular species depends on the availability of alternative food sources. Let's try to translate that into simple English, right? A dietary generalist meaning you'll eat whatever, right? You're not too picky. So I'm thinking like a teenager versus a 5-year-old, right? 5-year-olds are usually quite picky. They only want to eat like chocolate cake and French fries. Teenager will eat anything. They'll just open the fridge and demolish everything in there, right? So I'm just imagining a teenager, right? A generalist, a dietary generalist, whose fidelity to a particular species depends on the availability of alternative food sources, meaning if there's other food sources available, then anything can happen. He may or may not eat the particular species. Number two, they can be dietary specialists. That's the 5-year-old who'll only eat French fries. But their abundance may vary widely from year to year, resulting in variable pollination of their preferred food species. So that's a second reason for why pollinator could be unreliable, just because of the abundance, like how many of that particular pollinator there are. If it varies widely from year to year, that would cause it to be unreliable. Okay, so the first one is one that's only loyal to the particular species as long as there's no alternative food sources, and if there are alternative food sources, then all bets are off. Second reason is a generalist whose abundance varies widely. And the third reason is that they may be dietary specialists, but their abundance may be chronically low relative to the availability of flowers, meaning there's this many flowers available, but only this many pollinators. So even though they're dietary specialists and they're loyal to that particular flower, and their abundance is not volatile, but their abundance is low. So a low abundance, a variable abundance, or dietary generalists who are not that loyal. Okay, those are the three reasons why a pollinator can be unreliable. So I've studied everything there was to study about what makes a pollinator unreliable. Now I'm ready for the answer choices. Is it a dietary specialist whose abundance, I feel like a dietary specialist whose abundance is typically high? No, that makes it it's the opposite of a correct answer. Is it a dietary specialist whose abundance is at times significantly lower than that of the flower? Pick B, move on. This is exactly the third type, the third option in that list. Right? Where, remember I said there's this many flowers but this many pollinators? That's answer choice B. Pick it and move on. Not reading C, D, and E. Why would I? Right? Nothing good could come of it. Last question of the day, ladies and gentlemen. According to the passage present day columnar cacti in the Sonoran Desert. So again, let's recall our map. That was these ones here in the northwest. These are the ones who used to only open at night, but they've adapted, right, through evolution. Now they remain open after sunrise. Let's put that here. So these remain open after sunrise. That's what we knew about those. So they differ from their close relatives in that they, what? Have flowers that remain open after, if only that said sunrise, right? That's wrong. Are pollinated primarily by dietary specialists. I don't know. Didn't read that. Can be pollinated by nectar-feeding bats. I believe that's true, but I don't think that that's a difference. Right? We're asking in what way are they different? They have stigmas that are unreceptive to pollination at night. I don't know. Are sometimes pollinated by diurnal pollinators. Diurnal, that meant daytime. Is it true that these flowers in this region are sometimes pollinated by diurnal pollinators? Yes, it's true. That was kind of the big surprising phenomenon, right? That those are sometimes pollinated by daytime pollinators, whereas these other ones in southern Mexico are not. So I wasn't sure about C and D. I wasn't confident enough to eliminate them, but I am confident enough to pick E and move on. Now, I probably would have been a lot more attracted to C and D, and maybe B as well, if I spent a lot more time in the details of the passage. So again, I'll encourage you all to really think about what you want to read and what you want to not read, not because you're trying to save time, but because you're trying to save yourself from being attracted to the trap answers. Because they always will have something attractive about them, and that will usually be something from the details that you wouldn't have even read if you had thought to not read those details. And I think that's probably one of the big takeaways of the day. I'd say the other big takeaway is spend as little time as possible in the answer choices. I hope that you noticed that about my strategy. The answer choices are designed to be confusing. The wrong answer choices are designed to seem attractive. The right answers are designed to seem unattractive. So the less time I spend in the answer choices, the better. And again, that same thing goes for critical reasoning. And I guess the other takeaway is work on getting better at identifying the words and phrases that carry a significant meaning, such as were once, exclusively, why together with a question mark. Notice that in this passage, the most important text was the word why and the question mark. And in the first passage, the most important text was here. Right? And how do I know what the most important text was? It's the text that gives away the author's thinking, the author's reason for writing the passage. And that's really what verbal reasoning is all about. Okay, so thank you all to those of you who attended. If you are catching this on the rerun on YouTube, thank you for watching. I do try to respond to all comments, so I invite you to submit any follow-up questions or feedback in the comments below, and I will do my best to get back to you. And of course, if you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up because it really helps the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.